The Ohio Valley Hospital was always the hospital, at least to my family and friends. Oh, sure, there was St. John's, but it seemed like it was the little hospital or Catholic hospital. But most of the people I knew was born in the Ohio Valley Hospital, including me, so I guess it just felt more familiar somehow. Also, it was a huge employer. I have unusual memories of the hospital from the 1970s. Between the ages of, say, 8 and 12, it was often my playground. My father had polio when he was around 17. He was one of Jonas Salk's test patients, which led to the polio vaccination. Sadly, the disease left my dad somewhat crippled. He spent time in the hospital almost every year. I want to point out that hospitals were vastly different in the 1970s, not just because all the nurses wore white uniforms instead of today's scrubs. For one thing, you were allowed to smoke, not just in the lobby, but in the hospital rooms. My dad would be on a respirator and using flammable oxygen, and his roommate would be smoking a pack a day. To this day, this leaves my mistrust of doctors. How they allowed this boggles the mind. All guesswork in a white coat. People from the steel mills would pass out cartons of cigarettes to their employees that were patients. Also, security was very lax. My mom and grandmother would go up to visit my dad, and I often waited downstairs in the lobby. Well, so they thought. As soon as their elevator door closed, I was off. Some days I'd go roam all the floors of the parking garage, or even better, make box paper airplanes and throw them off the highest floor of the garage and watch them do loopy-loops and sail down to the tops of the trees. A box plane is where the nose is folded back and folded differently, which allows it to do stunts. One time, an unfortunate patient threw himself off the top of the garage, and a few days later I was looking over to seeing if I could find where he landed. Some days I'd roam the hospital floor by floor, seeing sick people laying in beds being visited by family members, walking down past the morgue, sometimes getting to see a dead body with a sheet over it being wheeled in. I would sit in the employees' lounge. They had a microwave. These weren't so common in the 1970s and too expensive for a kid to play with. I'd make little square slices of pizza that I would get out of a little glass door vending machine. I suspect this led to me not being questioned around the hospital. Just once, as two nurses was leaving, one asked my name, and I told them, and one said, "See, I told you he was a doctor's son." Turned out I had the same name as a prominent doctor in the hospital. But even without that, a kid who was always seen running around the hospital and who was always in the employee lounge, he must have been somebody's kid that worked there. Sometimes I like to hide in the corner of an elevator. I'm an only child. Maybe that's what made me a people watcher. Every human drama plays out to an almost invisible 10-year-old in a hospital elevator. People crying who lost a family member. People happy they are now being released because they got well. People congratulating new dads. I like to go into the lunch counter they had and order a fried ham and cheese sandwich with a Coke. I felt so grown up. Kids didn't get to do that alone so much. At least not me. I liked the gift shop. It was a sterile smell to it. I would buy a Mad magazine or a word jumble. I'd go down to the lounge and work them. When I visited my dad, I always checked the drawer for the plastic bags with the tiny toothpaste, mouthwash, and such. I had quite a collection. My dad always complaining nurses would wake him up to ask him if he needed a sleeping pill. I don't know if he was joking or not. My friend's mother worked at the hospital. She took us to movie night for the employee families. They played American Graffiti, one of George Lucas's early films. This was a big deal. This was before VCR tapes or HBO. If you wanted to see an uncut movie, you had to go to a movie theater. But after years, my antics came to an end when my father died in the hospital. Years later, I worked for the community college in Steubenville. If I understand this right, the reason the college only offered the PN degree and not the RN degree was because of a not-so-secret handshake that the hospital would allow our nursing students to go there for our student practicum, and we would stick to the PN degree so we wouldn't be competing as much with the hospital school of nursing. This is sad because this conspiracy hindered ultimately thousands of students, mostly women, in furthering their education. Also, if you're a patient, wouldn't you want your healthcare worker to have more education and not less? Both institutions get a lot of tax money, So they should have been out for the public's best interest. And I bet you this impacted the Ohio Valley somewhat. But for the Ohio Valley, the hospital, Ohio Valley Hospital, will stay in my thoughts as the hospital. As always, it's me, Camroy, here on YouTube.